Illustrator features a whole bunch of different kinds of effects that are all grouped together underneath a stylize submenu. If you go over here to the effect menu and choose stylize, you'll see things like drop shadow, for example. We've already been using the drop shadow effect several times throughout this title. But now let's explore some of the others that are here. So I'm going to start off over here by just clicking on this line that I have. I'm working in a file called stylize effects. You can find that file inside of chapter 14 of your exercise files. And I'll go over to the effect menu, choose stylize, and then choose add arrowheads. This is a great way to simply add an arrow to the end of a line. I'm going to click on the preview button. You can see now that I have an arrowhead applied to this line over here. And what's really cool about this is that you can choose a start and an end point. So my start on my path is here, the end is here, and I currently have this selected. Notice it says here 1 of 27. Well, there are actually different types of arrowheads that I can choose from. Nice simple ones like triangles or other more complex ones as well. You could choose whichever one is more apropos for the task that you're working on. You could also choose a scale setting. So for example, right now, maybe I want a much smaller arrowhead. Maybe I adjust that to around 50% in scale so that it becomes a much smaller arrowhead. I could also, of course, add some to the end as well, so I could have those as well. You notice that some of the settings up here are like little hands or little dots and circles, for example. Great for callouts or other things as well. I'm actually going to leave this right now set to have nothing at all for the start. So let's go back to here where it's actually set to none. And then click OK, and that's how you apply the lovely effect here for the arrowhead. Now the reason why this is significant, by the way, as a live effect, and is not really simply an attribute that you apply to a line, is because if I now adjust the rotation of that particular line, for example, I take this and I drag it down to right here, you'll notice that the arrowhead automatically updates itself to now match the orientation of that line. So that's one of the great things about the live effect of the add arrowheads. It's important to note also that add arrowheads can be used on many kinds of shapes. It doesn't necessarily have to be a straight line. It can be a curved line, or it doesn't even have to be a line. It can be any other kind of shape for that matter at all. Let's move on to another particular effect in the stylize menu called feather. Feather allows you to apply a soft edge to a normally hard-edged vector. So for example, I have this shape right here. If I go to the effect menu, choose stylize, and then choose feather, if let's say I choose the preview setting here, notice that I now have softened the edges. It's almost on some level like a Gaussian blur, but the difference is that this effect happens to fall above the line. It falls in the grouping of Illustrator effects, not like over here where the Gaussian blur falls underneath the Photoshop effects. This means that the stylize feather command is not bound by the resolution that is setting over here. In other words, it does not change if I change the resolution, as opposed to the blur setting, which does change when I do change the resolution. So you can use the feather effect as well if you'd like to. I think it's pretty cool. And alternatively, there are some other pixel-based effects here. If you choose effect and you choose stylize, there's something here called inner glow and outer glow, which basically do the same kind of thing. I'm going to click on the preview button. You can either apply a glow towards the inside or the outside, but it has almost that same type of effect on some level as the feather that's there as well. Let me click on this star shape that I have right here, because if you go to the effect menu and choose stylize, there's a setting here called round corners. Round corners, when you first look at it, might be an effect that you might want to apply to a rectangle and just round off the corners of the rectangle. But it's important to know that the round corners effect works in any object. So for example, a star that has many different corners here, if I click on the preview button, maybe that's a little bit extreme right there. Let me do something maybe around 12 pixels. Click OK, see how it rounded up all the corners that are there. It's a really great way to soften up a particular shape. If you create something with all the vector tools inside of Illustrator and have all these pointy, sharp edges, applying a rounded corners effect could really soften that up. Again, just like any other live effect inside of Illustrator, if I go into outline mode, Command Y or Control Y, I see that the star still has all the pointed edges over here. Remember, the live effects don't change the underlying vector. However, the appearance of that has that particular rounded corner, and if I wanted to now go ahead and actually edit or adjust those rounded corners, I can go to the object menu and choose to expand the appearance, in which case now the effect is no longer a live effect, and now I have the access to all the anchor points. So finally, the most often used effect in the stylize menu is the drop shadow. If I go ahead and I apply it to text, like in this case here, I'll select that text, choose effect, I'll choose stylize drop shadow. Let me click on the preview button. I have the ability to choose the opacity. The actual mode is important because by default, let's say most drop shadows are usually going to be black in color. By the way, you could change that color right here by clicking on this to change it to a different color. But normally that black would multiply with any color that this particular object might be on top of. However, there may be some circumstances if you want your drop shadow to be a different color other than black, where rather than using the multiply blend mode, you may want to go back to using normal or some other blend mode as well. You can adjust the opacity, the offset, which is basically how far away the drop shadow is from the actual artwork itself. In fact, sometimes I actually have a drop shadow set to an offset value of 0. So now I basically see almost like a little bit of a blur, or you can think of this as outer glow effect using the drop shadow effect in this particular manner as well. In fact, this is kind of cool when you think about the possibility of actually coloring your text white. In this case over here, you'll just see the drop shadow, and the text itself will be white, kind of knocking that out. So there's lots of really cool ways to get effects. Using the drop shadow inside of Illustrator, of course, is a live effect. The beauty is that you can still edit this text and the drop shadow updates as necessary. So there's a quick look at some of the stylize effects inside of Illustrator. Next, we'll take a look at one other effect that's really inside of that menu. It's called the scribble effect. Even though it's part of the stylize, there's enough settings inside there that I want to really dedicate an entire movie to just discussing what the scribble effect does.